Welcome to Beyond 3D, a space where we explore new perspectives about consciousness, emotions, neuroscience, energy, healing, and the new paradigms transforming the way we live, work, heal, and create our reality. I am Flavia Sierra, creator of Quantum Neurointegration Mindfulness, and your guide on this journey beyond all ways of thinking and into a more conscious, connected, and empowered way of living. Because the world is changing, and many times the answer we are searching for cannot be found from the same level of awareness where the problem was created. So together, let's explore what exists beyond fear, beyond limitation, and beyond the old 3D paradigms. This is Beyond 3D. Welcome back. I am so glad you're here for another episode. A couple of weeks ago, during Cafeteando con Fla, my weekly Zoom gathering where we explore topics related to consciousness, personal growth, and the way we experience life, someone asked me to talk about collective grief. I immediately thought, what an extraordinary topic, and one we rarely take the time to explore. It also made me realize something else. Over the past several episodes, we've talked a great deal about the inner state. We have discovered that it's much more than a passing mood. It is the way our entire system organizes itself to respond to life. We've also seen that this inner state isn't fixed. It can learn, it can transform, and it can reorganize itself. But today, I'd like to invite you to look at this from a much broader perspective. Most of us assume that our inner state is shaped only by our personal history. If we feel anxious, sad, irritable, or overwhelmed, we naturally look for explanations within our own lives. Our childhood, our relationships, our experiences, and that's true, but only up to a point. Because there are experiences we don't live through alone. We experience them as families, as communities, as nations, and sometimes as humanity. And if we are honest, the last few years have been filled with exactly those kind of experiences. Whether we are fully aware of it or not, these shared events also leave profound marks in our inner state. When we hear the word grief, we almost automatically think about losing someone we love. But grief is much broader than that. Grief appears whenever we lose something that mattered deeply to us. Sometimes it's a person, but it can also be a relationship, a dream, our health, a career, financial security, our sense of freedom, our trust, or even the future we imagine for ourselves. And when those losses aren't experienced by just one individual, but by millions of people at the same time, we are talking about something that we rarely name, the collective grief. Take a moment and think about everything our world has lived through over the past few years. A global pandemic that disrupted life across nearly every corner of the planet. Wars that continue to separate families, forced migrations, violence, economic uncertainty, natural disasters, and social changes unfolding at a pace few generations have ever witnessed. While all this was happening, most of us simply kept moving forward. We had jobs to do, children to take care for, bills to pay, and problems to solve. We did what human beings have always done. We survived. But very few of us stopped to ask an incredibly important question. Who was helping people process everything they were living through? Think about the pandemic alone. Some people lost loved ones. Others lost businesses they had spent years building. Many lost the jobs that gave them stability. Young people missed milestones that would never come back. Families spent months separated, unable to hug one another. And countless people began living with a level of uncertainty and fear they had never experienced before. Not everyone faced the same losses, but everyone experienced some kind of disruption, some kind of fracture. And perhaps one of the deepest losses was the one that almost nobody talked about. We lost our sense that the world was predictable. For most of our lives, we made plans believing that to some degree, tomorrow would resemble today. The pandemic reminded us how quickly life can change, almost overnight. And even though many things now appear to have returned to normal, our nervous system doesn't always recover at the same pace. Because our system doesn't respond only to what's happening in the present. More importantly, it responds to how well it has been able to integrate what happened in the past. There's a reflection that helped me understand this in much deeper way. Some people go through a painful experience, allow themselves to cry, talk about what they are feeling, seek support, and little by little begin to integrate what they have lived. Others do the exact opposite. They stay silent, keep working, keep solving problems, continue taking care of everyone else, and convince themselves they are fine. But beneath the surface, their system is still carrying an experience that never had the time or the space to be processed. The real problem has never been feeling pain. The real problem is believing we have to pretend it isn't there. Emotions that are never expressed don't simply disappear. They often change form. Sometimes they become anxiety, sometimes irritability, sometimes deep exhaustion, difficulty trusting others, a constant feeling that something isn't quite right, or that strange sensation that life has returned to normal and yet somehow it doesn't feel normal inside. And probably you listening today are one of these persons. Perhaps the hardest part is that many people eventually begin believing there is something wrong with them. I see this every day in my practice, when in reality their system is simply trying to make sense of experiences it never had the opportunity to fully process. And that changes everything. It changes the way we see ourselves, it changes the way we relate to others, and ultimately it changes the way an entire society begins to experience life. Now, there's something I believe is essential for us to understand. When an entire society goes through a difficult experience, it's not only the external circumstances that change. The way people begin to interpret life changes as well. Think back to what we explored throughout the last several episodes. Our inner state isn't determined simply by what happens around us. It is shaped by the way our system processes what we have experienced. Whenever our brain perceives a threat, the nervous system does exactly what it was designed to do. It protects us, it becomes more alert, and it prepares us to react quickly. For thousands of years, this ability has been one of the humanity's greatest strengths. It's one of the reasons we have survived as a species. The problem begins when that protective response stops being temporary and quietly and slowly becomes our normal way of living. Because then the nervous system starts to adapt to functioning from a constant state of alertness. And when that happens for months or even years, we slowly begin to normalize things that are actually signs our system is still carrying a heavy burden. We get used to feeling tired all the time. We assume constant worry is simply part of adult life. I bet you think this is life. We accept poor sleep, short tempers, mental overload, and the feeling of always being in a hurry. Little by little, we stop asking ourselves an important question. Is this really the way I want to experience my life? That's a huge question. There's a phrase I heard many years ago that has stayed with me ever since. Human beings can adapt to almost anything. And that truth has two different sides. On one hand, it's one of our greatest strengths. But on the other, it can become one of our greatest traps. Because when we normalize constant stress, we stop looking for peace. When we normalize distrust, we stop opening ourselves to others. And when we normalize fear, we stop imagining new possibilities. And sadly, most people in the world is living like this today. Without even realizing it, the collective inner state of an entire community begins to shift. That's why collective grief doesn't affect people only as individuals. It changes the way we live together. It impacts a whole society. Notice what happens when a society spends long periods living with uncertainty. And I bet you notice it around. Patience becomes scarce. Arguments become more common. Aggressiveness. People divide more easily. Listening becomes harder. The need to be right grows stronger. And empathy begins to fade. And perhaps one of the saddest consequences is this. Many people begin to feel deeply alone, even while surrounded by others. This is a really sad, awful sensation. Because when everyone is focused on surviving, it's much harder to truly see someone else's pain. In our episode about energy, we talk about something very important. Energy never remains isolated. It is constantly shared. Just as the calm presence of one person can help regulate someone standing in front of them, fear, hopelessness, and emotional tension also spread. Whether we realize it or not, we are continually influencing one another. Our energies, our electromagnetic fields are constantly crossing by. Think about your own home. Sometimes all it takes is one person walking through the door feeling overwhelmed or emotionally distressed, and within minutes, the entire atmosphere changes. The conversations change, the tone of voice changes, and the way people respond to one another changes. Now, imagine that same happening, not within one family, but across millions of people at the same time. In many ways, that's exactly what humanity experienced. Perhaps this helps explain a question so many people have been asking in recent years. Why does it feel like the world has changed so much? The answer is because it has. But not only because our external circumstances changed. The collective inner state from which we began experiencing life changed as well. That doesn't mean we are destined to remain there, and that's the very good news. It simply means we first need to recognize what happened, because we can't heal what we continue to deny, and we can't transform something we've never learned to name. To me, this is where one of the greatest acts of self-compassion begins. Instead of asking ourselves, what's wrong with me? We begin asking, what has my system lived through that still needs to be understood? Again, this is one distinction of the 3D and 5D consciousness. In a 3D consciousness, we always ask ourselves, what's wrong with me? And that's a very automatic pilot expression that we have in the United States and in English. What's wrong with me? Or what's wrong with you? But then if we bring it to a higher consciousness, then the question is, what has my system or your system or her system lived through that still needs to be understood? Because that's the real question. There's something to be understood. That question no longer comes from judgment. It comes from awareness. Judgment is 3D, awareness is 5D. And the moment the question changes, the path toward healing begins to change as well. So another good news is that just as collective grief leaves deep mark on us, it can also heal. To me, that's one of the most hopeful truths we can hold on to. Because if there's one thing we have discovered throughout this podcast, it is that human beings have an extraordinary capacity to adapt. The very same ability that helped us to survive difficult times can now help us rebuild. Many of you know that I am in a different path than the one I used through my career. And that's the reason why I am doing it. Because I have been through years, through my life, through experiences, learned how great human beings are, how powerful we are, how many things we have still to discover about what we are capable of. But now, healing doesn't mean forgetting, nor does it mean pretending nothing ever happened. Healing means integration. And we human beings are capable of healing and capable of integrating. It means reaching a place where you can look back at a painful experience without your nervous system reliving it as if it's happening all over again. And every healing journey begins in a remarkably simple way, by acknowledging what we have lived through, by recognizing what we have lost, and by giving ourselves permission to feel, even if it doesn't feel good. Because emotions don't need permission to exist. They simply need a space to be expressed. We live in a culture that taught many of us to be strong, to keep going, to hold everything together, not to cry too much, and to move on as quickly as possible. But very few of us were ever taught how to move through pain. Many people are afraid of pain. When pain has nowhere to go, it often finds another way to speak. Sometimes through the body, meaning a disease, sometimes through chronic stress, sometimes through emotional exhaustion, and sometimes through the way we begin relating to the people around us. That is why being truly heard, being accompanied, or simply hearing someone say, "I felt that too," can become profoundly healing. This is exactly what I'm here for. Pain changes completely when it no longer has to be carried alone. Throughout the last several episodes, we have discovered that our inner state doesn't only shape how we experience life, it also influences the reality of the people around us. The more I study human behavior, the more convinced I become of something. A person who learns to regulate their inner state offers an extraordinary gift to their family, their friends, their workplace, and their community, and going beyond their countries and their planet. Someone who lives with greater calm naturally brings calm into every room they enter. Someone who has learned to truly listen creates spaces where others finally feel heard. And someone who recovers hope often helps others find their own. That's how communities work. That's how companies work and produce results. We are constantly influencing one another, which also means something incredibly beautiful. Healing can spread. Not only fear, not only anxiety, not only hopelessness. Confidence can spread, serenity can spread, compassion can spread. Every act of awareness eventually becomes part of the collective awareness around us. Again, that's why I do what I do today. Every thought you transform, every emotion you learn to regulate, every interpretation you choose to shift, and every response you make from a place of greater consciousness begins reorganizing your inner state. Never think, never please, that you are doing very little for your community, for you, for your family, for your country, if you are working in yourself. There's no such thing as a little contribution. Everything is a huge contribution. And this brings us back to the heart of everything we have been exploring together. Your inner state isn't simply how you feel. It is the way your entire system organizes itself to respond to life. And when that organization changes, your experience changes. But so does the experience you offer everyone around you. Because your inner state never remains locked inside you. It expresses itself, it communicates, it influences, it becomes part of every interaction you have. And that's precisely why communities can heal. Not only because circumstances improve, but because the people who make up those communities begin to change from within. Perhaps that's why one of the greatest challenges of our generation isn't simply rebuilding economies or strengthening institutions or reconstructing cities. Perhaps our deepest work is rebuilding something even more fundamental: trust, our ability to feel safe again, our willingness to see one another with humanity, and our capacity to support one another instead of becoming divided. Because no community can truly thrive when its people remain trapped in survival mode. When survival becomes our default state, creativity begins to shrink. Collaboration becomes more difficult. Empathy wears thin, and hope slowly fades into the background. That's why caring for our inner state is no longer just a personal practice. It is a profoundly human responsibility. We never heal only for ourselves. We also heal for everyone whose lives we touch. Many people believe that changing the world is an overwhelming task, and perhaps it is. But maybe real transformation begins somewhere much smaller. It begins in a conversation where you choose to listen before you judge. In a hug someone desperately needed. In a few words of encouragement, in being fully present with your family after a long day, or in the simple decision to care for your own inner state, knowing that your calm, your presence, and your healing will inevitably reach the people you love. This is my story. This is exactly what I've been through. I have been bullied. I have been treated with some aggressiveness at some times, with not understanding what I was doing. But honestly, even it was very painful, because it was, I cannot say it wasn't. It was worth it, because I understood this, and I know, and I knew since then what could be the impact. And I was sure of what I was doing. And I did it of course, for myself. But to be honest, I first thought of my kids and the future of my family and the world. So I wanted to do something different. And yes, I cried, and I cried very much because I was not understood, but I was strong enough deep inside of me to do what I was doing. And I know now that I didn't make a mistake. Because, peace is contagious, hope is contagious, calm is contagious. Perhaps one of the most powerful ways we can transform society is not by waiting for everyone else to change, but by becoming a safe place where others can begin to regulate themselves again. And this is me. And this can be you. And this is something worth remembering. Every time you choose presence over reactivity, understanding over judgment, or compassion over fear, you are doing much more than improving your own life. You are helping reshape the emotional environment around you. Because every family, every team, every organization, and every community is built one nervous system at a time. The healthier our individual inner states become, the healthier our collective experience becomes as well. We often underestimate the ripple effect of our own emotional regulation. We assume our inner work belongs only to us, but it never does. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to transmit either tension or safety, fear or confidence, disconnection or genuine human connection. What do you choose to be? That is why the work we've been talking about throughout this podcast matters so much. Learning to regulate your inner state isn't about becoming perfect. It's not about never feeling fear, sadness, or uncertainty or grief. It is about developing the capacity to move through those experiences without allowing them to become the place where you permanently live. Because life will always bring uncertainty. There will always be moments of loss, unexpected change, transitions, and challenges we never saw coming. The goal is not to eliminate those experiences. The goal is to cultivate an inner state that allows us to move through them with greater resilience, greater awareness, and greater compassion for ourselves and for those around us. So we have reached the end of today's episode. We began by talking about collective grief, but in reality, we've been talking about something much greater. We have been talking about hope, because the moment we understand how our shared experiences shape our inner state, we also discover something incredibly empowering. Our inner state can change. And when it changes, everything else begins to change with it. If there's one idea I'd love for you to carry with you throughout this week and for the rest of your lives, is this. Every time you care for your inner state, you are doing far than transforming your own life. You are helping create a more conscious family, a more compassionate community, and a healthier society. A healthy society isn't built only with better laws, better governments, or stronger institutions. Actually, healthy societies don't need any of them. Those things certainly matter, but lasting transformation also depends on something much deeper. It depends on people who once again feel safe, present, connected, and deeply human. Perhaps one of the greatest contributions any of us can make to the world isn't simply achieving more, accumulating more, or doing more. Perhaps it's becoming someone whose presence helps others remember what safety, trust, and hope feel like. Ask yourself if you want to be one of those. Because every regulated nervous system becomes an invitation for another nervous system to regulate. Every calm conversation interrupts a cycle of fear. Every compassionate response weakens division. Every act of genuine presence reminds someone that they are not alone. And maybe that's how collective healing truly begins. Not through one extraordinary event, but through millions of ordinary moments, where people choose awareness instead of unconscious reaction, presence instead of distraction, compassion instead of judgment, and hope instead of resignation. We have often been taught that changing the world requires something dramatic, but perhaps real transformation happens much more quietly. One person at a time, one family at a time, one conversation at a time, one inner state at a time. That's exactly what I want to do with corporations and companies, because there are one person, and then from there they can expand to their worlds. Because when enough people begin living from a healthier inner state, the collective experience begins to shift as well. And maybe that's exactly how a society heals. Thank you for spending this time with me. As always, I truly appreciate that you choose to be here, exploring these conversations together. Until next time, remember, the way you care for your inner state doesn't affect only your own life. It becomes part of the emotional environment you create for everyone around you. So continue choosing awareness, continue choosing presence, continue becoming the kind of person whose calm helps others remember their own. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Beyond 3D. I am sending you a big hug, all my blessings, and I look forward to being with you again in our next episode. Thank you for sharing this space with me. Take a moment today to reflect on what resonated with you, and maybe ask yourself, what would change in my life if I started seeing reality from a different level of consciousness? I am Flavia Sierra, and this is Beyond 3D. Until next time.